Hello and welcome to my channel where I trash on Switch games for being lackluster, then go ahead and praise the 3DS iteration that came before them. Today's victim, Shin Megami Tensei 5. It's actually my favorite game released last year. I had a blast playing through it, and I know many others who would agree. But if there's one universal complaint, it's that everything to do with this plot sucks. The story is bare bones, the exposition is unexpressed, the characters do about as much for this game as Atlus does for Persona 1 and 2. There's a million reasons as to why people hate the plot, but our question today is how? How did Atlus drop the ball so hard here? Was it intentional, or was this a fusion accident? Yeah, you know what, let's do that one first. Reason number one, Nocturne. Our story starts in the lawless age of the 2000s. Over 15 years ago, the very first SMT game to arrive on North American shores was Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. It sold fair on release, but turned heads in the community and was generally appreciated as a niche Atlus JRPG. Just the fact that they reprinted it so many times through the course of the PS2 lifespan, as well as getting so many versions, I think that says everything you need to know. I mean, that and this.
Ooh, that's good news. Thank you, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne.
I know now in retrospect, lots of people like to pick at Nocturne for several of its design choices. It definitely wasn't a flawless game, but a lot of that is comparisons with future entries, which is also why we're here today. But you gotta think, for this being the first go in America, fans didn't really know what to expect, and what they got, they loved. But this can be an issue as it would become almost 10 years after Nocturne with Shin Megami Tensei 4. When the graphical style of the game was revealed, fans were upset at the decision to use sprites and first-person battles rather than the 3D models exhibited in Nocturne. There was also flack over the character designs not being done by longtime artist Kazuma Kaneko, the cutscenes having a visual novel floating portrait type of style, and this fucking guy. Overall, just lots of SMT4's early criticism were that of its presentation, where people felt it didn't deserve to carry the name 4 but follow Nocturne. If this sounds familiar, Wind Waker. As someone whose first megaten game was Devil Survivor and who loves the Mother trilogy, I thought 4 was really taking it a step ahead. I don't know why people thought that it was disappointing to have 4 be locked to the 3DS, and I don't think it's anti-evolutionary, but personal theory, I blame Strange Journey. Despite the early skepticism, SMT4 sold well, and by well, I mean about at the same rate as Nocturne, but well enough that it landed a semi-reimagined sequel in 2016, which also got a ton more criticism, but this time it was mostly related to the game's plot and characters. I will not weigh in right now, but I have thoughts. And finally, we land ourselves in early 2017 when SMT5 is revealed at the first Switch showcase. Pause. Now, not to say that it was decided by the fan base, but put yourself in the shoes of Atlus monitoring the feedback of these 3 games, and also kind of this one. Going forward, if you wanted to right the wrongs of the past game in the eyes of your own fan base, how would you go about it? Would you try to evoke, that's a Persona reference, the minimalist atmosphere and graphical display of Nocturne that was well praised for its time? Or would you take a swing at another game in the style of SMT4 and its sequel, which had just been bombarded with so much criticism for years? Well, what do you think Atlus did? Which game does 5 feel closer to? Which game did they re-release right before 5? Yeah, you guessed it, Tokyo Mirage I'm going to save my thoughts on Nocturne 2020 and why this was a poor idea for another video, but let's just say this approach had 2 issues. One, I think Atlus actually repelled more interest with this remaster than they did capture it. And 2, Atlus pulled way too much inspiration from Nocturne. This vast open desert destroyed Tokyo that directly references events from Nocturne, it was clear that the team was trying to conjure up some of that SMT3 magic, but no! What made Nocturne special was that it was different, it was unlike anything else at the time, and pretty much still is. What made SMT4 special is that it took those roots and planted them in a whole new garden. It's the same for Strange Journey. You want your sequels to be different, you want to try new things. If you've already conquered the idea in one entry, why attempt it again, Atlus? The relationship with 5 and 3 was all too clear, which is one potential reason why Atlus decided to tone the story down. But it still fumbles because 3's plot was clearly okay, another video sometime soon. I need to follow this one up anyway, but let's get back to our timeline with reason number 2, which is the far more plausible one. Unreal Engine. In January of 2017, Atlus reveals the game, which shows the classic title screen with all new 3D demon models. Very well, Atlus, sounds like quite a task, but okay, go on. In October of the same year, the official title for the project is given as SMT5, alongside a short teaser and interview with Yamai where he says this. If I am to raise the single direction SMT5 is aiming for, it's to stare back again at the nature of the era. Even in the current 2010s decade that will soon end, there ought to be many people who are frustrated with problems from the inside and outside, such as uncertainty on employment and pension, terrorism, and nuclear weapons. Because we're in such an era, I want to create an SMT that can empathize with the thoughts everybody's minds. We want to challenge that with SMT5. And if you take a look at the final game, he is of course referring to none of this shows up ever. This focus on contemporary social issues within the world was completely abandoned, but why? Well, after this, we'd get one more interview in February 2018 that stated that the game was now in full-scale development, and more specifically, that developing the demons was taking about 3 times as much effort as previous titles. And it's that last piece that exposes the truth of what was going on with Shin Megami Tensei 5, because after this, silence. For over a year, nothing new, and it even hit a point where fans thought the game was canceled. But of course, it wasn't. The reality? Unreal Engine had an unreal learning curve that the team had miscalculated. They had never done anything in this engine before, and it was proving to be quite the battle, pushing closer and closer to release. To get the game to a playable state, which, let's face it, still suffers performance issues, the team had to make decisions for what would save them the most amount of time, and it's very clear they chose the plot. There's a lot of evidence for this in the game itself, whether it's forgettable characters set up to be important, or revealing key information in very flat ways, or just things happening with little backstory or no mention. It's very plain to see where things were removed. But there's some outside evidence that also shows the cutbacks that had to be made, namely, Hayataro. Did I pronounce that right? Hamtaro? What do you want from me? Demon designer Masayuki Doi explains that Hayataro was originally meant for a very different role than the one he was given in the final game. Actually, Hayataro was originally supposed to be the first demon that the protagonist meets and recruits in the game. We ambitiously dreamed about maybe even having the protagonist ride Hayataro's back as his partner in crime, but then the technical reality of realizing that dream started to kick in. Ultimately, given his role as a one-off character, we had to forego that idea. Similarly, in the early stages of development, Hayataro was selected for a certain purpose that ultimately wasn't realized in the final game due to various story changes and his shifting roles within them. I think this original purpose is something that many people will be surprised to hear about, so I'll keep it a secret for now, though I'd love to still talk about it eventually, perhaps at a later time after the game launches. So there we have it. Atlus actively had to change the story established in early development for the sake of easing technical errands, and it makes sense. Hayataro shows up on the cover of the game, but he only has like 3 lines in the whole story and does pretty much nothing. Between him originally being intended as Pascal 2.0, probably having a bigger part, and the whole terrorism nuclear weapons thing from earlier, it honestly sounds like they were aiming for something Shin Megami Tensei 1, but nope. Knowing how much fans enjoyed Nocturne and how much the recently released Apocalypse had been in the hot seat, did the team really want to risk a delay or crunch to serve a potentially backlash story? Probably not, and that's why a lot of the things ended up seeming incomplete. Of course, this also worked out to Atlus's long-term advantage because,
oh my god, Atlus intentionally released a game that could be improved both in terms of performance and narrative?
looks like they'll just have to come back with an enhanced port or semi-sequel in 2 years for $60, totally not forecasted or anything. I'll buy the special edition day one. I think the part of Shin Megami Tensei 5 that really matters is the gameplay, because it's a game. As long as it succeeds there, then it succeeds in general, and it certainly did. Story comes second in this medium, and I've enjoyed games like Nocturne where the charm is in the absence of setup. But there's a difference between intentionally creating a game with a minimalist story and breaking the promises of the original vision you put out for the game early on. Atlus knows how to tell a good story. They've done it once, they've done it twice, 3 times, 4 times, and it's clear that SMT5 was aiming for something bigger than received. But the team also wanted to make that grand 3D model return to console and needed to learn Unreal Engine to do it, which ultimately took priority over the game's plot. Whether this was the right move or not is definitely up for debate, but one thing is clear: Shin Megami Tensei 5 Young Man Edition is going to be one nasty re-release.